Everybody, welcome to ELNET's Monday briefing. We've got a very interesting conversation to be had today, but first I'd like to address something I think everybody's attention has been drawn to over the last week, and that is French President Macron's announcement that France intends to recognize a Palestinian state. We'll see what happens. As many of you know, he is speaking in New York today with Saudi Arabia and a group of other countries. But notably missing or absent from these conversations are the UK, Italy, Germany, CE countries, and a number of other countries. I'd like to address his statement and what his intentions may be. Quite simply, Macron's recognition of a Palestinian state is premature, it's counterproductive, and it is cynically motivated by domestic politics rather than genuine peace. And as I mentioned just a moment ago, Starmer's, Maloney's, and Mertz's refusal to participate is proof of how misguided it is. Let's talk about some of the political motivations. The reality is that, unfortunately, President Macron is a lame duck president right now with 20% approval ratings. France is suffering from economic woes. There's a political triangulation going on. The right-wing opponents are far more pro-Israel than the left. It's forcing President Macron to appease left-wing constituencies to keep the government afloat. This is a cynical use of a humanitarian crisis, and it's not one that's going to promote peace. So let's talk about some of the challenges that still remain as practical obstacles to Palestinian peace. Palestinian statehood. Hamas control. Gaza still remains under the control of a terrorist organization holding 50 Israeli hostages, and Hamas is still committed to Israel's destruction. And any such talk of a Palestinian state hardens, not softens, hardens Hamas's negotiating position, making peace far less likely. There's a governance vacuum in the Palestinian territories. Palestinians lack a functioning governmental institution, and the Palestinian Authority exercises limited control even in areas under its jurisdiction. It lacks a functioning economy. No viable economic system exists. Decades of conflict have created aid dependency rather than productive capacity. How do you have a state if you cannot pay for it? And last but not least, the educational system is morally bankrupt. Current system promotes narratives incompatible with peace. They glorify violence rather than preparing the youth for at least coexistence, if not for partnership. So Macron's statement is a classic putting the cart before the horse. Recognition should follow, not precede, development of peaceful governance structures, economic independence, and educational reform. It provides perverse incentives. It rewards Palestinian intransigence, thus making reform and peace harder to achieve. It perpetuates conflict because it creates false expectations while failing to address underlying sources of conflict. And it consigns both peoples to continued strife. So here are some thoughts for those who care about the Palestinians and prospects for peace. Focus on prerequisites or preconditions. Palestinian institution building, renunciation of terrorism, and educational reform. These must be preconditions. Make recognition contingent on demonstrable progress towards peaceful governance. Demand serious diplomatic engagement rather than political theater. And finally, give Israel time to grieve. If you want Israelis' trust, you must trust Israelis as democratic partners to do the right thing, as they've shown the propensity to do decade after decade. Now is just not the time. These are the discussions that my colleagues around Europe are holding with European political leaders, and these ideas are what are keeping Germany, Italy, Poland, CEE countries, and even the UK from siding with Macron. These discussions and these points must be addressed month after month, year after year, until Palestinians get the message. Now, much of this, as we know, is predicated on the weaponization of information. We exist in a war of information. One of the evils of such a war is that it conditions us to dismiss information, even the truth, because we no longer trust what is truthful. If we look at the humanitarian aid in Gaza, we get the perfect example how information can be weaponized against Israel. On the one hand, we have a picture of Muhammad al-Matuk, who is on the front page of New York Times and is all over Twitter. Or the little boy Yazan, similar picture, who was published in the foreword. Muhammad suffers from cerebral palsy and other conditions that have nothing to do with starvation, yet his picture is being put out there as proof of starvation, explicitly and implicitly blaming Israel. On the other hand of this information war, we have become so accustomed to lies that we dismiss the truth that there is a crisis. It takes so much more of that information to convince us that a crisis exists. Yes, it's bad for Palestinians, but this also creates tremendous international pressure on Israel. So we need to address this war of information and figure out what to do about it, because it affects all of us in more ways than we tend to acknowledge. So I am excited to share the screen and share the stage and to speak with my friend, former colleague and CEO of Honest Reporting, Jacki Alexander. Jacki has been HR CEO since 2022 and was selected in 2024 as one of the top 100 people positively influencing Jewish life by the Allgemeiner. There is no one whose intellect and integrity I respect more. So I am very pleased to welcome you, Jacki.
Thank you so much for having me and inviting me on, Mark.
So I think the Free Press knew we were speaking today because they published two articles today, one by Mati Friedman, the other by Amit Segal, discussing the very issue that we're going to discuss today. And in addition to what I just led with, I want to read something by Mati that I'd like to get your thoughts on, if you can encapsulate all this. He writes, in a blizzard of ideological fiction, how are sane citizens in Israel or anywhere else supposed to know what's true and to do the right thing? It's not an exaggeration to say, as we're seeing right now, that the answer to this question can be a matter of life and death.
And I think we need to take what Mati said just a step further. So he wrote a very well-read article back in 2014, right when he had left a piece saying that the world doesn't know what's happening in Israel. They know what journalists are telling them is happening in Israel. And so to take that in conjunction with what he's saying now, we are in a world of chaos. There is so much information that's available to us that it's no longer easy to distill or go through any of that. So we rely on journalists or content creators or influencers who appear to authentically and genuinely be giving us information to go through all of that. But what we realize, as you alluded to earlier, is that we're getting narratives. We're not getting any sort of real idea of what's happening. And let's take the picture of Mahmoud, because we've done a lot of that on the Honest Reporting side. This is a child that is suffering from a terrible disease, multiple diseases, not just cerebral palsy, but muscular degenerative diseases. Clearly, that was available to the outlets that were reporting on it. CNN even mentioned it in their video. BBC did not. And yet he's being the most vulnerable of society, is being portrayed as indicative of the general population. And in addition to that being just misleading and problematic, it's also an effect of, if we cannot properly identify the problem and diagnose the problem, we cannot come up with solutions. Simply getting aid into Gaza is not going to help this poor child. And there are other children that have been evacuated for medical conditions. So we're having the wrong conversation about this child so that journalists can push a narrative, and all it does is exploits this child, and it doesn't actually help him with the solution that comes around.
And these narratives have implications because ultimately they affect policy. If we look at the conversations that are being had by heads of state, all of them that are being influenced by the starvation narrative, by the humanitarian crisis that's unfolding there. Can you connect some of these dots? How does this work?
Okay,
is it just as simple as them reading the paper and getting outraged, or is there something perhaps more nuanced, diabolical?
It's no coincidence that every single time Hamas is on the ropes, we start seeing these narratives being pushed in the media. And there are a lot of things that we have to unpack with that. Number one, for 20 years, Hamas has had a media training program. That includes journalists, that includes photographers, as well as content creators, and honestly, they're useful idiots abroad. They tell people what to report on, how to report, and this is not a take my word for it situation. They publish these guidelines to Facebook, and specifically during this war, they push that information out via their Telegram channels that anyone can subscribe to. So whenever they feel on the ropes, and right now is a perfect example, the propaganda machine goes full force and the media plays along. And I think there are a lot of different reasons why the media plays along. There is no doubt that the media, the international media, knows that that the journalists and the content creators in Gaza must work with Hamas. And the reason that I'm confident that they know that is because they've said that to us. Every time we reach out to an organization, let's take AFP, for example, we reach out to them, we say, you have a photographer, you have a journalist. Here, they were honored by Hamas. They participated in a Hamas work day or any sort of thing like that. Their response is, in order for them to operate in Gaza, they must work with the local authorities, and Hamas is the local authority here. Okay, well, so then why aren't you putting a disclaimer on every single thing that they write that says this person operates under the auspices of Hamas, and therefore they are subject to the guidelines that Hamas issues? And they simply won't do it. And they either won't do it because they agree with the narrative that's being told, or they're afraid that they're going to lose their access. So they're purposefully pushing things that they know are not true. But it's no coincidence that every single time Hamas is on the ropes, and right now, Hamas is on the ropes. Qatar and Egypt came out against them for wasting their time during the hostage negotiations. Washington Post, I believe it was, issued a story saying that they were essentially going bankrupt and they weren't able to pay salaries because of the new GHF scheme to distribute food. So they take a step back, they put the propaganda machine into full force, they become intransigent, and then Macron comes out and says, we're going to reward you with a state. It was diplomatically the worst possible thing he could have done, only followed by the letter that was issued by the 25 countries the week before.
Yeah. So there's some things to unpack there. The first I just find interesting is losing access. They're afraid of losing access to demonstrably false information. So I'm not sure what access you necessarily want to have if the information's coming to you as a foreign journalist is false. You're knowingly perpetuating false information. So it's odd to necessarily want to continue that.
Well, but if you think about it, if your business model, remember, journalism was originally the fourth pillar of democracy as a check on the government, right? Mm-hmm. But the media has changed significantly in the past, 20 years, but a couple hundred years. Their business model is now based on clickbait headlines and advertising clicks. If that's what you're making money on and you are a for-profit organization and you can get these videos, these pictures and these videos out of Gaza, and just think about this picture of Mahmoud. Remember, it was clearly manipulated. This child was wearing a diaper in the series of pictures, but the one that was published, he's wearing a garbage bag for a diaper. His mother is positioned. If you look at traditional Christian art throughout history, Catholic art throughout history, this was positioned as the Virgin Mary with her looking down, all of it. Really, this was meant to push a narrative, to emotionally connect with a very specific group of people. That's why his very healthy toddler brother was cut out of the pictures. Mm-hmm. So you put all of this together and you realize that their business model relies on advertising clicks, then it's not so surprising that they wouldn't want to lose access to this. Think about CNN.
Yeah, it's interesting.
CNN International is in every hotel from Morocco to Indonesia. Just picture the globe in your head for a second. And then you have Israel in the middle. You want to be in every single hotel room on the TV from Morocco to Indonesia. Think about how many countries, think about how many billions of people that's covering.
It requires such a paradigm shift for us to
Yeah.
factor that in. I mean, so I want to get more into, we'll get into that in just a moment, because there's also another component here that I'd love to explore. And it's the idea of Israel's bad PR. Now, yes, Israel has some really bad crisis communications. They have missed the boat on a number of opportunities where they could have taken control. But it is generally, to me, a blame the victim argument. I can't tell you how many times I've heard people say, if only Israel had better PR, we wouldn't have to deal with this. And my response is, there's no other country on the planet that we'd actually have to say that about. You don't say that about Iran. Iran needs better messaging. You don't say that about China, about North Korea. You don't say that even about Germany or Poland or any of the really good countries. Israel's the only country for which we have to say, if only they had better PR.
Right.
Sort of putting aside all the goodwill that it does around the world by saving people from tsunamis and earthquakes, the emotional bank account on Israel is perpetually at zero, it seems. So how do you look at this? Or how do you kind of push back, perhaps, or shed light on the argument that if only Israel had better PR?
So I think there are a couple of things that we have to address with this. Number one, Israel's actually been trying to address PR head on. They have published videos, they've published sources, they've published recordings of conversations that they've picked up among Hamasniks and Islamic jihadists in Gaza. No one really cares. And I hate to say it like that, but the media is aware. They're not covering it. They have, the Israeli government has been doing press conferences and so many things that you can think of, and it doesn't actually matter. And that's before we get into the complications of Israel's messaging. So here's something that's really important for people to understand. When Israel thinks about messaging, they have three primary audiences. The first is domestic, right? They have to convince their people that they are strong and project security, and we're going to take care of you, and we're going to take care of our enemies. Then they have to message to their enemies. They have to make sure that their enemies know they are prepared to fight them and they will win. Again, you have to project strength and security. Finally, we come to international audiences. And there you have to go from an aggressive tone to a submissive tone to effectively reach these audience, which means they now have to talk out of both sides of their mouth, which is what they're constantly accused of doing, because they have to project the exact opposite message, and that impacts their credibility. So that's one thing. The messaging is really important in terms of their audiences. The next part is a little more complicated, and that is that we like to believe that we have the winning message, the stronger narrative. And if only we got our message out to the choir, or even to, beyond the choir, to the haters, we could win. And that's just not true. Or at least it's not true in large part. So Honest Reporting has a division that has completely separate public branding. Its only job is to work with the foreign press based in Israel. It's the only independent organization that doesn't take governmental money that is doing this work, providing journalist services. When the missile from Iran hit the hospital in the south, the very next day we had 35 outlets at the hospital doing live spots from there. Before the war even began, going back about 2 years, when there was the rise of the Lion's Den in the West Bank, we were bringing foreign journalists into Nablus, Jenin, to meet with members of the Lion's Den, meet with regular Palestinians on the ground. So we know what information these journalists are being exposed to, because more often than not, we're the ones who are bringing them to where the news is breaking. That also means that we are highly aware of what they are not reporting. And the fact is that these journalists get excellent information from the mouth of the UN itself, saying we have raised $15 million to rebuild houses that were destroyed in Jenin. And we have not spent a dime of it. And they could not answer why. And the outlets that we took there didn't mention it at all in their reporting. Or take last week, everyone was talking about the burning of the Taipei church, right?
Mm-hmm.
Huckabee came out against it. Lindsey Graham came out against it. We took a major top tier American outlet to that church so that they could see that the church itself was not touched. We have video from the church. You see some scorch marks out by the fields, but the church itself was not touched, was not burned. They didn't report on it. So the fact that we just have the stronger narrative, and if we simply got our PR in order, that would make a difference. I don't buy it. Now, to kind of wrap this up, because I do believe in thinking positively about this, there is a very large group of people that is a relatively blank slate. I do a lot of public speaking. I speak to Jewish audiences, non-Jewish audiences, student groups, et cetera. And there are so many people that don't know that hostages are still being held by Hamas. The phrase October 7th doesn't mean anything to them. And those are the people who are really receptive to the messaging and to learning about what's happening and getting context. And I think that's where we need to be focusing our messaging and our outreach.
So let me push you. Let's delve a little further into that. To what end? So it's one thing that college students or some of these other groups become aware of October 7th, that they learn that there are still hostages, but we're dealing with heads of countries who are buying this propaganda. Where is the connection between the positivity, these are the untapped markets, and their influence on those that have a direct impact on Israel's security?
Well, because we have to think about things in short term and long term, right? The more you have a general population that is anti-Israel and vilifies Jews, the more they're going to elect in the short term politicians who display that same animosity. And long term, those young people, someone's going to be the next prime minister, the next member of parliament. So reaching out to these people is critical. And what's very interesting to look at is if you look at public polling that is consistent, not one-time Pew polls, but take the Harvard-Harris CAPS poll, which is consistent polling on a monthly basis. You see that in the 65 and above crowd, you have about a 3% swing between the low on support for Israel and the high on support for Israel. So that tells me that the 65 and above crowd has made up their mind and we're not swaying them in any sort of meaningful way. There is an over 30% swing when you look at the 18 to 24 group. It goes, a little under 50 to well above 70, 75. That tells me that these people are, number one, still making up their mind about certain things. They're not sure what to believe, and they're highly susceptible to the information that they're seeing. So as long as we are putting out information in a way that they want to digest it, and in a platform where they are looking for that information, we have the ability to sway these people that will be deciding our futures at some point in the next 20 years.
Before I move on to the next question, I guess I can sum this up. You started with Hamas's incredibly well-oiled propaganda machine, communications machine, and we just sort of ended with Israel's good machine, but it's really the receptivity of the audience. So in this case, it's where opportunity and luck meet for Hamas. They have a very receptive audience, and they happen to have a very good machine that just makes everything work so easily.
Look, they also have simplicity of message and they're not bound by truth. And I think that that's something that's very hard for I hate saying our side and their side, but for simplicity's sake, our side, whether it's the Jews, pro-Israel, non-Jewish allies, it's very hard for us to lean into that. And I think, again, Muhammad is a perfect example of that. I'm in a significant number of activism groups with different types of people from different industries. And even though they're aware that Muhammad suffers from multiple genetic disorders that is impacting this, there are still a good portion of people who are saying from our side, it's so distasteful to have this conversation. At the end of the day, this is a starving child. We need to be feeding him. The rest of it doesn't matter. There's never been a war in history where one side has to feed the other or take it. The rest of it doesn't matter because our values say we have to help that person. So we perpetually live in shades of gray. That's how we were taught to be, right? Mm-hmm. Never accept anything, question everything, have 15 opinions for one thing. And the other side lives black and white simplicity. And that, I think, is the biggest thing that our side has to overcome.
It reminds me of Mark Twain's quip that a lie travels around the world
Mhm.
before the truth gets its shoes on in the morning.
Yep.
Um, Look, I mean, it's very easy for lies to spread. A lie spreads without any context. It's very difficult to overcome that lie with truth because truth has context and nuance and takes a lot of time and energy. You touched on this a moment ago, where you talked about the economic incentives to journalism as
Right.
a change. So what else has changed over the last, let's even narrow it down, 3 to 5 years from your perspective, or you can come up with your own time frame. What has changed that we need to be aware of as consumers of information, that we're not aware of?
So I want to go back 25 years because September 30th is Honest Reporting's 25th anniversary year. It is the photo that started it all. It's why and where we began. So I want to go back 25 years and take a look at what media looked like then. And back then we had a couple of things happening. We were about a decade into 24-hour news. And we had the second intifada going on, where there was so much happening so quickly that the news was getting it factually wrong. When there was narrative pushes, that got really dealt with very quickly. There were factual things, and we could be a media monitoring fact check that was dealing with corrections. That's simply not the case anymore. Now we are dealing with narrative-based pushes. Yes, sometimes media will refer to Jerusalem as Tel Aviv and try and make it look like Jerusalem isn't the capital of Israel. But we can actually get those corrected, right? Someone's just trying to see if they can get it in under the wire. But what we're really seeing is references to occupied territories. What we're really seeing is shifting the blame. Israel gets attacked by 7 countries, and the headline is Israel attacks on 7 fronts. It's obscene. Iran has been funding the Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis. They've been training them. They've been giving them weapons from day one. And all of a sudden, when Israel fights back, Israel is escalating tensions. These are narrative pushes. So I think that's the main thing. And what it made us realize about 3 years ago was that we cannot actually change the media for all the reasons we've talked about already, with the advertising and all of that. So if we can't change the media, then we have to be impacting the news consumers. And I want to give you another example in terms of narrative pushes and just the double standard that's across the board. In October 2023, the end of October 2023, there was a conversation within the BBC about why Hamas isn't referred to as terrorists. They're only called militants or fighters or something like that. So editor John Simpson came out, he wrote a whole piece about it, saying that the BBC doesn't call Hamas terrorists because it's simply not the BBC's job to tell people who to support and who to condemn, who the bad guys are and who the good guys are. Now, that was interesting because I had done a search right after he wrote that. And whenever there were attacks on European soil, the BBC had no problem calling those attacks terrorist attacks. It's just when Jews are involved and Israel's involved that they wouldn't. And then fast forward to a week or two ago, a meeting with CEO Deborah Turnus is publicized, that it gets leaked. And she's explaining that it is their job to help people understand that the political wing of Hamas is very different from the military wing of Hamas, despite the fact that the UK government has prescribed the entirety of Hamas, both wings, as a terrorist organization. That is a narrative push where they are trying to say that they're being even-handed, but they are simply holding Israel to its own double standard.
So I want to sort of bifurcate the outlet from the journalist, because I imagine they are separate. You have good, honest journalists who are working with what we would generally call bad outlets, or outlets that we don't generally trust. New York Times has some very good journalists, and very good minds writing there, though we would often say the New York Times as a whole tends to be pretty anti-Israel. Um,
Mm-hmm.
how do you What does that environment look like as a journalist who wants to be fact-based, but lives in an environment that is narrative-based?
So let's talk about the newsroom first, and then let's move on to the journalists who want to do good. And what I'm about to tell you comes directly from the president of a newsroom, a major American newsroom. What's happening in the newsroom is that the tail is wagging the dog. The advent of social media has given power to the journalists over the editors. So the role of an editor and an outlet is to provide a fact check, to help guide the narrative, give all of these other things that make sure that the journalist is doing what they need to do. But the editors are so concerned with pushing back on a story and the journalists saying, you're a racist, you're the input whatever you want the name calling to be, and going on social media on right over your shoulder, you have cancel culture, and being a victim of cancel culture, that the editors are basically putting their head down and not doing what they need to be doing in order to control the journalists. So that's what's happening on the newsroom, and it's going all the way up to the top. So you have these younger journalists, they're activists, they are doing what they want to be doing with not that much pushback on them. Then you have the journalists who want to do good. We have sources at 8 major outlets from America to the UK, European press, mainland European press, and the Middle East, that call us and they say, you may not have seen this, but you might want to look at this article and you might want to research this person. Or someone published this and I've been working with the executive team to overturn it and they won't. So I need you to take a look at this and see if you can do a social media push so that there can be external pressure on the team so that I can get changes done internally. That is a very real thing that is happening. Or explaining to us how certain producers on the ground in Israel are actively working against their editors back in New York, DC, and Atlanta, and publishing things saying that they've gotten the sign off that they needed when they really haven't, or publishing overnight when their editors are sleeping so that it's a done deal. So you do have people who want to do good. They're not finding any sort of traction that they need within their own newsrooms, and they're looking externally to help guide those newsrooms.
So it's a good segue to the next question that I want to ask because it's all related. You and I spoke to someone in Norway, a lay leader in Norway, who is dealing with their state-run media. It's called the NRK, which is equally or perhaps even worse than the BBC, according to the claims. And as you know, they're trying to research in order to make this more public. Are there other, so this is a two-part question. Are there other state-run media in Europe that you're familiar with that are as egregiously anti-Israel as NRK and BBC? Well, let's just stick with that one first. That's the easiest one. Start with that one first.
Perfect. So in full disclosure, we only monitor English language news. And I've given some BBC examples, but if you think about France 24, they've had to fire numerous reporters over the last couple of years due to their personal social media content being anti-Semitic. And as I alluded to, as a whole, the European press, with a few notable exceptions, is far more toxic than the American press. The narrative pushing tends to be more extreme. They refer to occupied lands. They refer to historic Jewish sites by their Arabic names, and they generally try to erase any sort of Jewish indigeneity to the land. This was a pre-October 7th example, but there was a teen combatant for Hamas, which on its own is horrible that Hamas is turning 15 and 16-year-olds into soldiers. But the obituary written for him by Reuters was he always wanted to be a chef. Well, that might be true, but he also murdered Jews and Israelis. And that's a type of humanization that's never actually shown to Israeli victims of terrors. You think about the murder of Lucy Maya and Rena D. Again, that was before October 7th. The family that was going on vacation and the mother and her 2 daughters were killed. They were shot execution style, at least two of them. Christiane Amanpour on CNN International said that they were killed in a shootout. A shootout is an old Western with two people shooting at each other. That is Alexander Hamilton and Aaron Burr. It is not three women murdered for driving on a road that these terrorists had determined was a no-go for Jews. And she said that publicly on CNN International. Now, we got her to apologize as a result of it. But that level of toxicity that exists in the European press, and I specifically do CNN International in Europe because there was a big fight between CNN International and CNN, between the London Bureau and the American Bureau, in terms of whether or not they were being too pro-Israel, and the London Bureau won. And that then empowered CNN International to go even further than they had been going.
So let's talk about what seems to be an ecosystem of media, meaning we tend to think, I tend to think of media in buckets. You've got mainstream media, you've got cable news, you have social media, and within social media, you've got different iterations, whether it's Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. But it seems to be that they're less independent as those types of buckets, but more they fit as an ecosystem within other types of bucket. A leftist bucket that is more mainstream cable and social media, a right-wing ecosystem of mainstream cable and social media. Is that fair to say? And how does this all, is that how information really gets perpetuated through these ecosystems?
Yeah, so let's dive into that actually. If you think about BBC News, an engaged viewer is someone who watches for more than 3 minutes. That's it. On a monthly basis, BBC News is reaching 6 million engaged viewers. Sky News, by the same definition, is reaching 4 million. If you take that into the States, and they don't have the definition of 3 minutes, unique, so not counting for returns, unique reach each month, Fox News is anywhere between 2 and 3 million, and about 80 to 90% of that is over the age of 55. And then there's a huge drop down to MSNBC, and then by the time you get to CNN, you're talking about 450 to 600,000 unique viewers a month, and it's an older crowd. Now you take those same outlets from BBC to MSNBC, and they clip a 90-second, a 2.5 minute, a 4-minute video, and they put it out on social media. Now millions of people are seeing it across all demographics and beyond borders. So there's absolutely an ecosystem there, but then it gets even more complicated. So let's talk about social media, because like you said, it's all encompassing. Social media can refer to influencers, or it can refer to traditional media that posts to an account, right? You could be going to BBC News on Instagram, or you can be following Bisan Oda from Gaza. And influencers are a mixed bag because there are some great ones out there. There are also some very well-meaning ones, but poorly executed ones who aren't fact-checking the way that they need to be fact-checking. And then there are downright liars. And the problem is, with the uptick in mistrust in the media, influencers offer an authentic, genuine, direct path to the news without the middleman. Except they aren't always so authentic and genuine. Remember, we've talked about this a few times. Hamas has a media department, and that includes content creators. And it's not an abstract thing. Bisan Oda received an Emmy Award for her reporting from Gaza last year. That gives significant credibility to what she's saying, despite everything, despite the lies. I mean, to be unsophisticated, despite the fact that she spews lies. And then you have not only content creators in Gaza, you have those outside. You have, Guy Christensen, who's called your favorite guy, who is a white 20-something in America who spews all of this stuff. So moving beyond influencers, people who visit traditional media on social media tend to think that what they're getting is valid, right? You can trust an influencer or not trust an influencer. But if I'm going to BBC News or MSNBC or Fox News on Instagram, then I believe that I am getting legitimate news. Except the bias that exists there is so different than what we're used to. Here, we're not looking at the narrative pushing because the way that these traditional outlets put information onto social media is this emotive picture with the bare minimum written across it. This picture of Muhammad and his mother as the Pieta is the exact thing that they're doing. It's look at this picture and be moved by it, right? Because they want the clicks. They want people sharing that. In order to read the story, you have to take 3 separate actions. Click in, go to the link in bio, and then get transferred to their website to read the story. No one is doing that. No one. A few hundred people at most. So it gives you this sense of safety in terms of what you're reading, but the nefariousness of it is far worse.
I want to remind everybody that you are free to ask a question. Please submit them to the link that Randy provided, or you can put it into the chat, either Q&A or chat, and I will ask those questions in just a moment. So allow me, Jackie, to play skeptic, because I know you're more than capable of handling whatever I throw at you. So, and you know I do this with love. So for all of those out there who say, you know, this all sounds great, but this is kind of like the tree in the woods. There is just so much out there, and the little that we do looks good and sounds good. How do you know that you're being successful? How do we measure success in this, what I would say is monumental task of essentially taking on a world that is descended into fiction?
So I think that things are both worse than we think they are, as well as far better than we actually think they are. I think we're far more impactful than we realize. Now, I agree with you. My social media feed is a dumpster fire of hatred.
Yeah.
But there are so many non-Jews, Black people, Muslims, Christians, Lebanese, all of whom are using their platforms to speak up on behalf of the virulent hatred that they see Jews enduring. I get text message on a regular basis sending me someone like a Dumasami Washington saying, hey, have you heard this guy? People are reaching beyond the choir. Now, we all heard what happened with the French Jews on the plane in Spain last week and the Israelis at Charles de Gaulle the week before. But in Munich, Germans formed a human chain around a synagogue to protect Jews inside from a pro-Palestinian march that was getting aggressive. So there really are bright spots, both in the fiction that exists on social media, as well as how that translates to the real world. Because one thing, you know, I should have mentioned this when you first brought this up with Matti Friedman, irresponsible reporting has real world effects for Jewish communities. When Yaron Levshinsky was murdered, it was the day after, right? So when the marchers in Colorado got attacked and then one woman ended up dying as a result, it's a direct result of irresponsible reporting. These have real world effects. So I do think that we have to focus on the bright spots as well. So in terms of what metrics we use, look, the easiest, most superficial thing to do is look at views, but I like to delve down deep into that because I love metrics. So we look at how many views we get from followers versus non-followers, because that's telling us whether or not we're getting beyond our choir, right? If 90% of my views are coming from those people that follow me, that means that I'm not getting new followers, I'm not getting beyond them, and I'm existing in that ecosystem that you mentioned. But that's just not the case. And typically only about 20% of our impressions come from followers, which shows that we're getting beyond our choir. And even if that means, by the way, that we're just reaching other low-hanging fruit, I'm okay with that, because how many people out there want to be the choir, want to go out and tell our story, but don't have good information? But I know we're not only reaching the low-hanging fruit, because one of the things that we do is very closely track who's following us and who's sharing our content. And we have a over the last year, we've developed a very significant following among the entertainment industry, whether it's musicians, producers, actors, directors, et cetera, who are sharing our content. They have more followers on their own than there are Jews in the world. Now, I can't tell you what percentage of their followers are Jewish, but it ain't all of them. Right? So that's one of the big things we do. We look at the demographic of our followers, which I mentioned earlier, because it's great to reach the people who want to hear the message, but I want to reach the people who need to hear the message. I want to see if student groups are following us and sharing our information, Christian organizations and Jewish organizations also. I mentioned that we had the whistleblowers at the 8 major broadcast. I think that's important too. The fact that people are reaching out to us and saying, you might want to look at that, shows that they see us as their partner in all of that stuff. And I'll end that with one quick story. We have a contact who reached out to us during the Cannes or right before the Cannes Film Festival and said, there is a major musician who is going to condemn Israel for the famine in Gaza. I need you to help me refute that. You cannot use the state of Israel or yourself as a source. So we put together a dossier mainly focused on Gazan sources that are still in Gaza. And we handed the dossier over to our contact. He got it to that musician, and I don't know whether it was our contact or that musician got it to a second musician who was also going to do it. Neither one ended up making a statement. Right now, it's really hard to prove a negative, a proof of a lack. But the fact is that people come to us and say, help us stop this. I think that is incredibly significant, because the damage that could have been done by those two people speaking out at Cannes would have been monumental.
Excellent response. Mine probably would have been a little more flippant, like, do you know how to eat an elephant? One bite at a time. But that was a terrific response, Jacki. Thank you. Now I'm going to pause for a moment so we can do a word from our sponsor, and I will turn it over to Sari Steinberg, ELNET's Midwest Regional Director, and then I will return. We have a bunch of questions, so I will start asking questions. Sari.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Jacki, for all you're doing on the information front. We know that's one of the vital fronts for Israel, and the current war is nothing short of a fight to preserve freedom and democracy around the world. And of course, Israel is at the helm fighting on behalf of us all. So not only do we care about Israel, but we care about the whole free world. I'm glad that ELNET has you as an ally in this endeavor to support Israel, and we all have to keep addressing our various aspects of the struggle. To everyone on this briefing, thank you for being part of the intense work that ELNET is doing to help Israel on the diplomatic, economic, and military fronts by strengthening Europe-Israel relations. As Mark said, this is an incredibly intense time for us, given President Macron's very ill-advised statement about recognizing a Palestinian state. We're working with great intensity to make sure that other European leaders don't follow suit. And at the same time, we're facilitating great developments for Israel's standing and security by bringing policymakers to Israel to see reality with their own eyes, by engaging European leaders in strategic dialogues and summits, by developing our network and strengthening these relationships all the time. We're seeing results right now, for example, in a brand new defense deal between Israel and Romania. And there are many more positive movements that are about to occur and that are on the more distant horizon for Israel's long-term security. Please keep an eye out for our email that comes every Friday with highlights of what's going on in Europe and how how ELNET is working to help Israel and to secure these relationships further. I am inspired today by a modest supporter of ELNET who wrote that he and his wife are going to increase their contribution right now because they're recognizing how vital ELNET's work is. So I invite you to please join those supporters in increasing your support for ELNET. And you can do that on our website, which is elnetwork.eu/donate, or send a check to us at the mailing address that Randy will share in the chat. Thank you, Randy. Of course, as always, our hearts are with the hostages and with the soldiers. We pray for Israel's safety. We pray for the hostages' immediate return. And may we hear only good news from now on.
Thank you, Sari. And now to some questions, Jackie. The first one is from Janice Hefter, who I think you might have just addressed with your last reference about the musician. But Janice wants to know, what are the efforts to meet one-on-one with news organizations, influencers, and in an effort to try to present different points of view?
There are significant efforts that are being done quietly and behind the scenes at every major, and not just news outlets, but the owners of the news outlets, PR firms, marketing firms, really trying to not only educate them, get journalists over to Israel. And look, the way that it was described to me again by the president of a newsroom was there's not a single article that comes out on LGBT issues that is not run through GLAAD. And we need to create the equivalent of that on Israel to make sure that they're using the right messaging to understand what the implications of certain things are. These meetings are happening at the national level as well as at the local level, with local federations reaching out to their to local news sources and the owners of those news outlets in order to help educate even simple things like how you frame a shot. If you're talking about violence and standing in front of a synagogue, people will take that personally and think that there is danger to them going to a synagogue. So there are efforts happening across the board. Again, we're fighting an uphill battle. But these things are absolutely happening on a daily basis. And people are really trying to, number one, collaborate with each other in this post-October 7th world and try and think critically, innovatively, and with fresh outlook for how we can impact these things.
You know, Jackie, we have people from probably 10 countries on this call. I wouldn't be surprised if we had members of parliament and other policy influencers. So what do you recommend for us as consumers, but also as potentially members of parliament and policy influencers to consider? How do we make a difference in this information war?
There is zero regulation among podcasts and social media. Zero. The reporting system that exists doesn't work, and the changes that are being made to the reporting system to make it be more democratic has broken the systems. Then you take AI. Mark, when you and I were growing up and we had to write a report for school.
I grew up a little longer ago than you did, but
and
yes, I sort of remember.
What I'm going to say still works for me too. I'm the last of the generation that can say this. I went to the local library to do research. Books, microfiche, whatever it was, right? There was a standard of information at that point. Move forward a couple of years, we had Google giving us information. Today, information sourcing, specifically among the under 30 crowd, is done two ways. Number one, the same type of search you and I would put into Google, whether it's what is Zionism or can I have a chicken Parmesan recipe, they put into the search bars of Instagram and TikTok. There is zero regulation. There is no baseline of information, nor any sort of relationship with reality in terms of the results they're getting. And I know because I run that search on a monthly basis to update my typical PowerPoint that I give people. Now you add in AI. Critical thinking has gone out the door. No one has to do critical thinking anymore because they can ask ChatGPT. Except Sam Altman of OpenAI has been very clear that over 30% of the weight that ChatGPT gives to any answer comes from Wikipedia. And we haven't even begun to talk about the dangers of Wikipedia and the disinformation campaigns, the organized, funded disinformation campaigns that exist there. So I think a couple of things need to happen. We need to be looking at these new information sources and figuring out, depending on what side of the aisle you're on, you like the word regulation or you don't like the word regulation. So when I say regulation, I mean it in a purely non-political way, but these news sources need to be regulated. You look at the reporting system, the community notes system on X and Instagram and Facebook, This should not be determined by people who have enough time to sit there writing and voting on community notes. Those are not necessarily the educated people that should be fact-checking information that is out there. And most importantly, there are so many policies that are already on the books that you just need a strong leader that is saying, we are going to start implementing them. This hatred will not be tolerated. Right? The world works not by law and order, but by the perception of law and order. You have a strong leader that says, we will not tolerate this. You're going to start getting some of the haters going back inside the closet.
Yeah. We've lost the general consensus of the essential mores that keep society in check, it would seem. And that is a challenge for all of us. Got a question about the word genocide from Sandra Dangour. It obviously has lost all meaning when discussed in the public forum.
Yeah.
Is there any chance to put that genie back in the bottle, meaning to lend any credence to the word genocide and disabuse people of its use?
I think this is the exact fight that's going to happen the day after the war. It's already happening now. And again, going to whether or not Israel has good PR or not, the Palestinians brought the question of genocide to the International Court of Justice, whether there was a plausible, whether they were plausibly should be protected from genocide. And the court heard the case. The court also very firmly decided that there was no plausible case for genocide against the Palestinian people. And yet every single day, there is international media saying that the ICJ determined that there was plausible genocide happening in Gaza. You have the human rights industrial complex coming out and saying that genocide is happening in Gaza. And if what's happening in Gaza does not fit the letter of the law of genocide, then we need to change what the definition of genocide is, which is absurd. There is a definition for a reason. You have to hit a very high bar in order for it to be genocide. So right now, as the war is continuing to go on, I think we're going to be in this misinformation warfare. But as I alluded to earlier, Israel is preparing its defense at the ICJ for the continuation of the case. And the day after the war, I think apartheid, genocide, ethnic cleansing, all of the other accusations that have come out, that is going to be the front lines of the warfare that we're going to be fighting.
Jacki, this was illuminating and informative, and I expected nothing less and got everything I had hoped for. So I'm so glad you joined us. We have a lot of questions in the queue. I'm sorry, we're running very short on time, so we're not going to get to all of them. If you want to ask your questions offline, feel free to email me or anyone else, and we will get the answer for you. Tom, are you saying a few words in closing?
I will try. Thank you so much. I'm overwhelmed with I have a cold and a hoarse voice, so I'm doing my best. Actually, I couldn't resist making a comment. Jacki,
I saw you come off mute, so I knew you were prepping.
Oh my gosh, Jacki, thank you so much for your insights. It's always nice to hear from you. And I hope that you're making a lot of inroads in Florida, and especially with that entertainment crowd you referenced. You heard from Sari, and you heard from Mark, and you know our organization. We are doing incredible work, and against odds, increasing odds against us, against Israel, even by our European allies. And what motivates them, Mark, thank you for shedding your opinion on what motivates them, and Jacki, you too. But irrespective of what motivates them, we do have work to do, and we are effective. And we are doing a lot of accomplishments. Some things are behind the scenes and not known, and other things are. So we just need the support. We cannot thank all of our supporters that are on the call today for what you do for us every day, make it possible for us to do our work. And we're most grateful. Thank you so very much. And please, please keep supporting us. We just need the support, and we'll do our work. Thank you very, very much.
All right, everybody, and join us next week, same time, same channel, for psychotrauma expert, Professor Muli Lahad. And given what we're hearing from Israel, the trauma is extensive, the mental fatigue is daunting, and it's becoming an epidemic issue that needs to be addressed. So we hope you'll join us next week. This week has been great. Thanks again, Jacki. Looking forward to seeing you and speaking with you soon. Bye, everybody.
Thank you
Have a
so much
great
for
day.
having me.
Thank you.